In Europa Universalis 5, your estates represent the entirety of your nation. Most countries start off with just 5 estates: the crown, nobility, clergy, burghers, and commoners. The Muslim nations also have access to the Dhimmi estate, which represents the people of the book, usually the Christians and the Jews, as well as there's the tribes estate if you have tribesmen present within your country. Managing your estates properly and understanding what they represent is the difference between having a successful and unsuccessful game. So by the end of this video, I promise that not only will you understand how they work, but you're gonna know how to best use them to have a much better Europa Universalis 5 experience. If you do learn something from this video, make sure to subscribe and leave all notifications on so that you know when I'm releasing my next EU5 mechanics guide. And if you haven't gotten the game yet, consider using my link. Affiliate links like these is literally one of the biggest source of incomes that keep the channel running, so thank you very much for considering it. The various estates within your country represent the different social strata, with the crown estate representing the royal family, that is you, as well as everybody else that is a part of your family tree. The nobility, pretty self-explanatory, represents the nobles present within your country, and we see actually the amount that we have: 5,815 nobles. In a surprising twist of events, the clergy represents the clergy of your country. That means all the religious folk, whilst the burghers represent the people that are in your cities that work in different specific burger buildings. And if we go to our production tab, you see exactly what buildings I'm talking about. When a peasant is promoted to work in one of these particular buildings, he becomes a burgher, and the commoners basically represents everybody else: the laborers, the peasants, the soldiers, and so on. One of the most important things with your estates is the estate power. You see it represented right next to the icon. We have 20.92% estate power for the crown, and that is determined by a variety of things. First off, it's determined by the amount of control we have over our population, which means the more control we have over a location, the more crown power we gain. In this case, 92% control means we're losing 7% crown power over the people within this particular location. And if we have 15 control, then we have almost no control over the people within that location, which also means they're more likely to join rebellions started by the other estates. We see here the entire population depicted, so that's 1.833 million pops, which give us only 204 value for political power, which then gets modified by the amount of legitimacy that can give us up to 10% extra political power. One of our policies, namely traditional distribution, lowers that power by 10%, whilst the ruler's administrative ability directly increases your political power for the crown estate. That means that the higher your king's abilities, the better your country is going to run from a variety of perspectives. Having below 25% estate power for the crown has a lot of negative modifiers, so you want to have your crown at least 25% or above at all times in the campaign. The more you keep it at, the better, because the amount of crown power also determines the exact amount of profit you get from trade. That means if you're getting 100 ducats from trade but your crown power is 20.92, then you're only getting 20.92 ducats out of 100. If we go to the nobility estate, we start with 52% power for this estate, which is an insane amount. That is because they have a lot of privileges given out, and these privileges modify the base political power of the nobles by a huge margin. One of these privileges, the inaugural diplomats, which is a unique privilege actually for the Kingdom of Bohemia, increases the power of the nobles by 100%. Having your power of the nobles above 25 gives you some negative modifiers, namely it lowers the amount of taxes that you can get from the estate. Similarly, if the estate power is below 25, it increases the amount of tax you can have from that particular estate. So in the case of the clergy power, burgher power, and commoners, we can tax them significantly more as they have less power within our country. At the start of the campaign, the nobility estate usually has a lot of power, but as you progress, your main goal is to weaken the nobility and not only strengthen the crown, but also strengthen the burghers and the other estates. Try and have a balance between them is pretty much the most optimal thing to do. Later on in the campaign, you will be able to have really high crown power, and the power of most of the estates will be lowered with the exception of the Burghers, which in this case is called the Astoi, as we're playing as the Byzantines in this run. From the mid to the late campaign, the Burghers will be pretty strong compared to early on, as there will be significantly more Burghers, 2.1 million Burghers in this case, compared to a few thousand that you start with. If we hover over the crown power, we see that we get an extra 50% and 100% from two values, centralization and absolutism. We managed to push to 100 centralization and 100 absolutism, which greatly increases our crown power. There's three advances: the statecraft advance, cuius regio, and sovereignty, all of which increase our crown power by 10%. Then we have certain buildings like the royal court, which is a first age building available to pretty much everyone that is a monarchy. Now this building does give 10% crown power. However, if we hover over the building itself, we see that it's operating at 85.71 capacity, as it is lacking some gold. Depending on the operating capacity of any building, you will get more or less benefit. If we had 100% operating power from this building, we would get the entire 10% crown power. We also have government reforms that can increase the crown power. Right now there's 4 of them, including universal serfdom, which is available because we have a very high serfdom value. And speaking of values, if you're not sure how they work, I've got a value guide linked in the description below. Make sure you check it out. Knowing how your values work is extremely important to know the game better. We've got also a few policies that increase our crown power by 20 or 10% each, as well as we have a lot of different modifiers from our royal family. We've got members of our royal family that are in the cabinet. Each of them will give 3.57 political power, whilst having one of our family members be in charge of the entirety of the fleet gives 25%. Another one's in charge of part of our army, which gives 12.5%. And we have one of our family members as the crown head of the cabinet, which gives another 25%. Take note, if we were to give command of the entirety of our army to our heir, then he would get 25% crown power rather than 12%. So the amount that you get from having your armies and navies led by your members of the dynasty is determined by the percentage of units that are under command of those particular characters. Also very important to note that sometimes, even though your crown members might be assigned as cabinets, they might not be the best options. So you have to think about it. Do you want to have great abilities for those particular cabinet members, which means you might make more use of those particular cabinet actions, or do you just want to get more crown power out of those offices? Goes without saying, it's the same thing for the other estates, having policies, estate privileges, advances, values, or members of those estates assigned in charge of the army, the navy, or as members of cabinet will increase the power of their particular estate. Now that we understand the power of the estates, it's time to talk about the satisfaction of the estates. Satisfaction basically represents how happy the estates are, and based off of that, you can tax them more or less as long as you have the option of taxing them, because there is a maximum and minimum tax too that is influenced by a variety of things. By default, you have 30% tax that you can give to all of your estates. However, we see in the case of the Hungarians, because they have the monetary fiefs privilege given out to the nobles, that lowers the maximum tax by 10%. And remember what I showed you guys earlier, the nobles having really high power lowers the amount of tax that you can give them again. So in this case, we can only tax them up to 10%. Taxing them up to 10% will lower their satisfaction by 10%. 1% tax, 1% satisfaction, and you need to have them at least 50% satisfaction or they will start rebelling. The current satisfaction level of the nobility is not permanent, and it changes monthly based on the satisfaction equilibrium. The equilibrium is determined on a variety of modifiers, policies, privileges, the amount of taxes as we discussed earlier. There's a base value of plus 40% satisfaction. The societal values also can increase or decrease the amount of satisfaction, as can the stability of your country and the ruler's diplomatic ability. You also can just spend a one-time one-time amount of bribe, and in exchange for that, you will gain instantly 10% estate satisfaction, and that money does go to the nobility, which in turn uses that money. We'll get to that in a few moments later down in the video. Money is not wasted in this campaign. Another way to quickly increase your satisfaction is by giving out privileges to the estate. So if we were to give the elaborate court life, it would increase instantly our satisfaction with the nobility by 15%, but it would lower the satisfaction of the other states. Now, despite this particular satisfaction being at 83%, it will go down and stay at 68%, as the equilibrium is the capacity for satisfaction. Similarly, if we had very low satisfaction because we just revoked the privilege for the commoners, is down to 9%, it will slowly go up every single month until it eventually reaches the cap, which is 44.85 in the case of the commoners, again determined by a variety of different modifiers we just explained. Now let's talk about the privileges themselves. Every single estate has privileges, including the crown estate. Except for the crown, they're not called privileges, they're called government reform. First off, changing a government reform will cost you a flat amount of 20 stability, which can go up and down based on a few other modifiers, and you're limited in the amount of government reforms you can give out. Early on in the campaign, it's normally 2, or it can be higher if there's unique advances, policies. And the later part of the campaign, you will have significantly more reforms, as with every single age there is at least one unique advance that increases the amount of reforms that you can possibly have. The reforms that you give out will absolutely shape the country itself, with different reforms giving pushes for different values, as well as increasing or decreasing power for various estates depending on the reform. The universal serfdom reform is a good example of that, since it lowers the peasant power. Take note, certain reforms you can only give out if you have enough societal value. So enforcing religious adherence we're able to give because we've got pushed towards spiritualism by 50. Similarly, if we had pushed towards humanist by 50, we would be able to give religious tolerance as a reform. In some cases, you might need pushes towards multiple societal values to give out reforms, like the exchange of ideas. Canceling a government reform or changing a government reform costs 20 stability, but in the case of unique government reforms like the Crown of Castile, you might need to wait for specific events or unique triggers to happen before you can remove these government reforms. In contrast to government reforms, giving out privileges only costs 5 legitimacy. Revoking it is a different story altogether, as it costs a lot of stability usually, especially early on in the campaign. The base cost is 400 stability to revoke one privilege, and this is multiplied by the estate power of that particular estate. In this case, the nobility has 36% power, so you multiply 400 by 36, which ends up with 145, and that is further modified by your societal values such as communalism, as well as by your crown power. If we assign our king as leader of our entire army and we wait for 1 month to pass, we see that our crown power instantly pushed to 27%, which means now we get revoking privilege cost minus 2.9 alongside a lot of other positive modifiers. So if we try to revoke this privilege, it is a little bit cheaper since the base cost has been decreased due to the increase in crown power. Later in the campaign, when the crown power is very low, such as 3% for the nobility in this case, it's going to be significantly cheaper revoking privileges, not only because the base cost is going to be a lot less, but you can stack up a lot of different modifiers that lowers the base cost. The Age of Absolutism itself has 33% revoke modifier, whilst increasing our communalism value, and the newly spawned absolutist value from the 5th age again lowers the cost of revoking privileges. There's also advances such as the scholarly treaties that do that, and the increased amount of crown power of course doubles down on it. So whilst later on in the campaign revoking privileges is close to nothing, early on it is close to impossible to revoke these privileges. A simple privilege for the nobility in 1337 costs 175 stability to revoke. Take note, there are also unique privileges such as the consolidated corruption of the elites, and we've got similar consolidated corruption of all 4 of the particular Byzantine estates. These particular privileges not only cost stability, but they also require you to have 95 minimum legitimacy before you even have the option of revoking them. Certain privileges are actually really beneficial for your country, so you never want to revoke them, and you might even start with some of them, such as the building roads privilege allows you to not only give the burghers the ability to build roads for you, but you also get increased for centralization value, which is a really beneficial privilege. If you have this, never revoke it until very late in the campaign. Similarly, market fairs, despite increasing decentralization, it increases monthly prosperity, and prosperity is one of the best modifiers for your country and is also very difficult to get prosperity, so having that privilege might not be the worst idea. However, other privileges like the communal lands is just a flat out debuff. Even though it lowers the nobility power by 5%, it's really not that big of an amount compared to the fact that it pushes you towards decentralization by 0.2. So this is one of the first privileges that you want to get rid of early on in the campaign if you can. When looking at the privileges, not only do you need to look at whatever they give as benefits, but you have to also look at the power that they give to that particular estate, as well as the value that that privilege affect, and the malices. So some privileges are just 100% debuffs, such as the banal lordship, and it gives a lot of power. It also lowers your maximum control, which is the worst modifier you can possibly have, and it makes your people more likely to join rebellions with only increasing serfdom by 0.10. That is a very, very bad privilege. You never want to give that out, obviously. Similarly, elite councils gives 50% power for the nobles, and the benefits it offers are very underwhelming. Just a little bit of stability decay, agenda impact for the nobility, and push towards aristocracy. No thank you. Feudal mercenary contracts is just horrible. You likely will not be using mercenaries in the first part of the campaign, and for just 10-20% premium cost and maintenance, you increase your power by 100%. Wow. In general, guys, there's like 2 or 3 privileges you actually want to have for the nobility, and I'm not talking about primacy of the nobility, because again, despite giving discipline, 100% power for the nobility is really huge. Plus, the 5% discipline helps you a lot later in the campaign when you actually have a professional army, and that 5% discipline can make a difference in a battle. But in the early phase, when you literally only have levies, the 5% discipline is not going to do anything, but the 100% increase in political power for the nobility is definitely going to do something. So this is a big noob trap, people giving out primacy of the nobility. I fully disagree with this. I think this is a great privilege to have mid to late game, but definitely not early on. Unless you have no other privileges, you start with somehow only 1 or 2 privilege and a very weakened nobility, then yeah, you can give that out. But most nations do start with very strong nobilities, and you don't want to make them even stronger. Also keep an eye out for certain privileges that have this modifier: block specific social strata from command. That is really bad, because that means even though you might have some really qualified characters in your roster, because they belong to a particular estate, you might not be able to assign them as your commanders. Some of the good nobility privileges that you should keep are the land rights, which increase tax efficiency and only give a little bit of aristocracy and 50% power. Auxilium et concilium is actually pretty good early in the campaign, as noble levy size plus 20% is a decent amount, as is the army levy size increase and the combat efficiency. In fact, this one I probably would keep the entire campaign if I'm honest. Nobility controlled serfdom is not bad, but if you can revoke it, definitely do revoke it. It would not be on a list of the first ones to revoke, however, as it's not as bad as some other privileges are. Fortification licenses, 100% revoke. Fort limit doesn't make much of a difference, as you're never going to need that much of a high fort limit. You just need to have 1 fort for every capital of your provinces, and that's it. And this privilege also increases decentralization value, which we don't want. Royal marriage rights is kind of bait, 50% increase in power for just 5% efficiency of cabinet. Absolutely not worth it, but again, not a priority for revoking if I've got other privileges that are worse to revoke. Elaborate court life is actually a good privilege because it gives cultural influence plus 20%. It does push you towards individualism, which is not my personal cup of tea, but some of you guys might be okay with it, so that's your personal choice. Expected cost of court plus 1% is pretty brutal, however, so make sure you have the money to sustain that increase in cost of court. It only gives 20% estate political power increase, which is actually pretty good for a privilege like this. And the 20% cultural influence will allow you to become cultural hegemon in the third age significantly faster, as there's not that many modifiers that increase cultural influence in the game. Manorial courts, absolute big no-no. Even though you get extra taxes for the nobles, the 50% increase in power pretty much offsets that, because it makes them more powerful, so you can tax them less anyway. So this is just 100% debuff. And of course, corruption of anything is bad. For the clergy, maximum literacy for the clergy and traditionalism push is not necessarily a good one, but if it's expensive to revoke, don't prioritize it since it's not the worst one ever. Strengthened faith is actually a good privilege. It does lower the tolerance of heathens and heretics, but it only gives a little bit of estate power, and it increases communalism by 0.2. And communalism is a value we definitely want to have since it helps us lower privileges a lot easier. Enforced religious unity, a must-have privilege, especially if you're playing in an area with a lot of pops that are not your culture, or you want to expand into an area that you're going to need to convert pops a little bit faster. Plus, again, it gives communalism and very little estate power. Powerful dioceses, again, a really good privilege. Extra clerics in towns is good. Religious icon is good. Very little power increase as well. Great Works of Earth, again, is really good, especially early in the campaign when you want to get your centralization up as soon as you can. It does have a little bit of extra estate power, so maybe after you've reached 100 centralization, you can cancel it. It's not that big of a deal. If you start in an area with a lot of different religions around, giving out expansionist zealotry will make it a little bit easier to deal with your neighbors, as will that push towards belligerent, which makes it less antagonism when attacking those neighbors. Holy Man administration, no. Lecture oaths, no. Even though it gives efficiency of cabinet and stability cost investment, population promotion speed is pretty bad, and the inability to construct universities is extremely bad. You could say give this out early in the campaign, but do make sure to cancel this by the point when you're able to build universities, which should be in the second age. Promote cultural unity, extremely good if you're planning on assimilating a lot of different cultures. It does lower the cultural capacity, but if those cultures around you are a completely different culture group, so as is the case here with the Turks, with the Bulgarians, etc., completely different culture groups, accepting these cultures is going to be very expensive regardless. 3.06 to accept Bulgarian, so you're never going to have enough cultural capacity. You want to assimilate them to your culture, which is why this privilege is an absolute godsend. Reduce military obligations, no. Religious administration is not bad, actually. Gives communalism and stability investment, but quite a little bit of power for the clergy, so you might want to revoke this later in the campaign. Religious advisory council, really good privilege, little bit of power and a decent amount of efficiency of cabinet, plus a little bit of spiritualism. Religious diplomats gives you an extra diplomat for little to no estate power, but the conciliatory push is a bit debatable. You could give it out if you're not planning to expand, but if you want to be a little bit antagonistic, you don't want to push towards conciliatory at all. Tax exemption, you can give this if you're why would you give this out? Explain to me why. Protect faith of the religious? No. For the burghers, the formal guilds pushes you towards plutocracy, but it gives a lot of power, so big no. Control over monetary policy can actually be good, but this is situational. For the Byzantines, this actually is a good privilege, as you can actually make a lot of money off of minting, and being able to mint an extra 0.05 can actually mean hundreds of ducats later in the campaign. However, if you're not making money off of minting and you're making more off of the burghers, do not give this out, as maximum tax for burghers minus 10% is actually a big deal. You have to calculate how much money you're getting from minting versus burghers, and then you know if this is good to give out or not. Land of commerce, really good privilege, highly recommend you give it out. Production efficiency is huge, and the capital push again is really good. Sponsored maritime contracts is bait, the 5% maritime presence, not worth it for the 33% power. Control over coinage, again, is good if you actually produce gold and silver and you're making a lot of money off of minting it. Otherwise, don't give it out because you're not going to make much. Market fairs we already established. Corruption we already established, as we did with the building of roads. Market attraction is really good to give out if you've got your own markets and you want to attract as many locations to join your market. Having more market attraction means that locations will be more likely to join your market than a neighboring market, and then you make the most out of the resources that that particular location provides. Building rights, yes. Burger land rights, no. Commercial advisory council, Absolutely yes. Not only the capital economy, but the trade capacity plus 10% literally translates to thousands of ducats later on in the campaign. Guild investment, I would say maybe later in the campaign, because it does have really high political power increase, but the innovation and capital economy could be worth it because you don't get many ways of increasing those two particular values. Shipwright contacts, no. Trade monopolies, absolutely no. Treasury rights depends. If you've got few burghers, so that max tax is not going to make much of a difference, then give it out, as tax efficiency for the other states will be a big deal. But if you've got a lot of burghers, then maybe not worth it. This one you're going to have to do the calculations in your particular game as well. Urban development grants, abso-freaking-lutely. This gives 0.01 development and innovative push for just 50 political power. Give it as soon as you start the campaign, no matter who you play as. In Europa Universalis 5, it is very difficult to actually get development, and having the 0.01 push from day one means you're gonna slowly, passively get that extra development for the rest of the campaign in all of your provinces, and then the different modifiers will start increasing more and more the development. Without the flat value from that privilege, you might end up with 0 development gain from day one, and you might lose out on hundreds of development by the late campaign if you don't give it out. It's very difficult to get development modifiers early, and that privilege is pretty much the only way to do it from day one, with certain exceptions for certain nations. Hunting permits, no. Communal lands, big no. Royal ecclesiastic courts, absolutely no. It does give push towards communalism, so if you really want to get communalism, you can give it out, of course, but overall it's just not that much push for communalism compared to the other debuffs. Corruption for the common people, obviously no. This is a unique Byzantine one. Autonomous villages, no, because of decentralization, and it has rural migration attraction, which you actually don't want. You kind of want your cities to get more of the pops than the rural locations, and it has a lot of power too. Common militias, 100% yes. It gives you more levy by 20%, which is a lot actually. It gives combat efficiency, and it allows peasants weapons, which means it increases the demand for the weaponry good, so you can make more money off of spamming weaponry buildings. Commoners and administration, no. It gives decentralization. Commoners and cabinet, not really a big deal, because usually commoners don't have great stats. Fewer levies. Do you want less levies? Of course not. Free mobility for the common people, no. You don't want to get that push towards free subjects, and you also don't care about the migrating or the extra satisfaction equilibrium reduction for the nobles. Means of production, big no. Production efficiency -4 is actually brain dead gameplay. I don't even know why this is even a privilege. No labor on Sunday, absolutely no. We always work double on Sundays. Partial lead, no, of course not. You want to have as much RGO size, not as little RGO size. And again, free subjects is a bad push. We don't want that. Representation in the parliament, nope. Protect faith of the common people, nope. Now remember, we also have those extra special estates. Let's start with the tribesmen, because this can appear for European nations too. It just depends whether you do or not have tribesmen within your pops. Tribal land rights, no. It gives no bonuses, and it only makes the tribes more powerful. Pasture access, yes, actually. This is the only one that is positive. It makes it cheaper to expand farms, and it costs basically nothing. Tribes levy size, again, yes, because you can actually get quite a few units off of that. Assimilation of tribesmen blocked, of course not. In fact, all of these are no. Only exception to this would be tribal cabinet. If you go through your characters and you see that, oh my god, this guy is 100, 100, 100, and he's part of the tribes, let me make sure I can hire him as a cabinet member. Then you go to the tribes and you're like, yeah, let's give him this privilege so I can hire that guy. Otherwise, you don't give it out. For the Dhimmis, guarantee land rights is up to you whether you want jurisprudence value or not, so that's situational. Dhimmi levy size, yes, it is worth it. Promote tolerance, no. Grant administrative posts, nope, not worth it for just 5%. Pact of Umar is actually worth it, especially if you're expanding a lot. You want the extra cultural capacity and the humanist push, so you can convert those pops to your culture a little bit faster. Abrahamic communities, no, if you want to convert them to your religion. If you don't want to convert them to your religion, then sure, you can give it out. It's your choice. I prefer not to give it out because I like to convert them to my religion. With the Dhimmi allowed in cabinet, same situation as with the tribesmen. Legal autonomy, big no. Maximum tax for Dhimmis -25%, obviously no. Mazalim court, nope. Preserve local traditions, big nope. And the last one also big nope. So in essence, it's mostly nope for those guys. Now it is very important that you guys pay close attention to this part of the video in particular. The amount of money created in a province gets distributed to the various estates depending on the share of that particular estate. So we see in the location of Buddha, the nobility is getting 2.49 ducats, clergy 1.05, etc., etc., whilst we get 1.54 ducats out of that particular location. What happens with this money? It doesn't go into thin air, okay? The various estates use that money. One way they can use it is they can loan you that money. So you only take loans in EU5 if there is availability of money to lend from the estates. If the estates have no money, you go bankrupt. Or you can try and get loans from banking nations, but banking nations don't have too much loans, and it's very dependent on your relations with them. Another thing that happens with the money that the estates use is they build buildings. There's a lot of buildings they can use. Remember, we gave out the building road rights for the burghers. That allows them to potentially build roads if that's what they want to do with that particular money they got. And if we hover over any of these states, we actually see their income after taxes. So monthly, the nobles are getting 27 ducats, whilst their monthly expenses, and this is very important, are 14.95. Why is this important? Because you want your different social stratas to spend their money on different goods within the market. Without people buying the goods from the market, your buildings are not profitable, and as such, you're not making any money. One important thing to take note of is that the amount of different social stratas is very important. The nobles are usually the ones that spend the most on goods. So we see right now they're spending 14.9 monthly on a variety of things, including fur, amber, weaponry, etc., etc. If we hover over the commoners, which have an income of 39 ducats, but this is for like 3 million people, okay, not 5,000 boyos. They're, however, spending 27 ducats out of that, so they're left over with almost nothing. You also can see the particular types of buildings that the various states would like to build. So the commoners want to build a bridge, which actually lowers proximity cost. So this is one of my favorite buildings, by the way, in the game early on, especially the whole game really. You can lower the estate enrichment after you get some advances later in the campaign, and later on the amount of money that the estates get is scaled. So we see in the 1600s the nobility is getting 1,800 income after taxes. So we've got literally 500,000 available to take in loans, which means we're probably never gonna ever go bankrupt at this point, since our estates have a decent amount of money for themselves. Also, they might start building negative buildings such as the pirate heaven, which increases chances for pirates with no benefits to us with the money that they've got. I really hope you guys learned something from today's video. If you did, let me know in the comment section what you learned, and make sure to subscribe and leave all notifications on, otherwise YouTube will not notify you when I release my next EU5 video. And speaking of, do make sure to check that societal value video I was talking about earlier, as well as get EU5 with my code if you haven't gotten the game yet, or any Paradox game you want to get. It really would mean the world to me. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.